It's a high-tech conversation.
And a low-tech topic.
Live on the World Wide Web via Zoom. Bench Talk 101.
Right, good evening everyone and welcome to Bench Talk 101. Tonight doesn't need much of an introduction. He's going to get one. Siggy, one of our own. He's going to give us a talk about Australian timbers, and I'm pretty sure some of us maybe have dabbled in them. Some of us haven't. Difficulties using them. I'm sure most of us have heard of most of them, or some of them at least. But so he's going to give us a talk through what he's saying. Furniture, woods or hardwoods mainly. I think he does have another talk up his sleeve in softwoods, but I think that would make it go for far too long. So he's going to talk through mostly hardwoods tonight and furniture woods. So it's my great pleasure to introduce, and you'll know that, to Siggy. So over to you, Siggy, for I'm going to highlight you now.
Thanks, Scotty.
There we go. Good evening, Siggy.
Cheers, mate. Bear with me. I'm still a little bit slow, probably because I haven't finished my cup of coffee, but we'll get there. Feel free to stop me at any time if you want to ask any questions or anything like that, because I do have a habit that when I get talking, I might motor my way through and forget about certain things that you might want to ask.
I think we'll have a little bit of decorum for the group. They know this already. Hands up, and myself, Paul. We can let Siggy know. He can always pause now and again during his talk and ask if people have got. He's quite happy to answer questions on the way through if people have got questions as we go. But rather than just interrupting or asking questions, I think we'll just let Siggy continue what he's doing, and he might pause now and again. When you go in,
I'll try. Yeah. I want to make sure that, like, if anyone has any random questions that I may not have thought about answering, that you can just ask them at any time. I don't mind. I'm totally cool if anyone interrupts me. Don't think that it's going to mess with my mojo. I'll be okay. Yeah. So I've got this PowerPoint that I shall share. Cool. So you guys can see that on the screen?
Yep.
Okay, so I'm going to talk today about Australian furniture timbers. What you can see on the screen there is the work of a guy called Robert Prenzel. And he was a migrant. He was a German cabinet maker and carver who came out to Australia in, I think, the mid to late 1800s. And he did a lot of work. He was based here in Melbourne, so right down the south coast or southeast of the country. And his work is all through the insides of cathedrals, or I should say a cathedral. It's St. Patrick's Cathedral in the city. And he did a lot of private work as well. And he worked, I wouldn't say exclusively, but he really liked to use a particular timber called blackwood, which I will go through later on. Let me just trigger my next slide. So for those who haven't met me, basically I'm based here in Melbourne. I'm not a full-time woodworker, so my day job is engineer and now parent. Woodworking is my sort of escape. So I learned woodworking through my dad, who is a German cabinet maker, who worked also at the National Gallery of Victoria. So he introduced me a lot to historic work like Robert Prenzel's work. And then later on, I did a lot of work with a guy called Frank Wiesner in Queensland, who passed away in 2024. He was 92 years old. And I would honestly say he was probably the most legendary woodworker in Australia, due to his longevity, but also due to the fact that he was extremely skilled, but he really focused on using Indigenous Australian timbers more than pretty much any other woodworker that I know of. But he is the only guy I know who really successfully blended that, I should say contemporary furniture maker who blended Australian materials with that European tradition really well. So I basically wanted to do this talk to raise the awareness of Australian timbers. They're starting to be forgotten, even within Australia. There are a lot of really skilled makers here in Australia, the younger generation, who are being influenced a lot by other Western publications, so mainly fine woodworking in the US. There's furniture and cabinet making in the UK, and also a lot of interior design magazines like Vogue and Architectural Digest, where they really push for using what we call exotic species, but it's mainly a lot of white oak and American black walnut. And so a lot of that clientele here in Australia that can afford custom bespoke furniture are really requesting those timbers. And Australian timbers are being forgotten. The American Hardwoods Council, I think is what they're called. They have a really strong presence here in Australia, which I think is kind of funny. And they're actually like really erasing a lot of the knowledge of Australian timbers because it's their business to try to push for American timbers to be used here. And it doesn't really make sense to me because for us to buy timbers like hard maple or black walnut, the prices that we pay for those are quite high, and I would say not sustainable in the long run. So the other thing too is that a lot of you guys may know about Australian timbers from species like Gidgee or Mulga, or even Western Mile. So I think the toolmaker Will Adams uses a lot of Western Mile. Those are really dense and rock-like sort of timbers. A lot of people or foreigners are under the misconception that that's what all Australian timbers are like. They're not. Those are what we call desert acacias, and they are really limited more so for use in knife handle making or pistol grips, things where you don't really have to use edged tools on them, using a lot of belt sanders and things to form them. So they are not really reflective of what we have available for furniture timbers. So my last point on this slide is bigger and better is not always the best. And the more dense, the more figured, the harder a timber it is. May sound great, but it certainly isn't the best for making furniture. So this talk I'm going to split in two. So first we're going to go through a bit of geography in Australia, and eventually then we'll work our way into timbers by state or by region. Australia is a massive place. I think we're 30 odd times bigger than the UK. We're the same size as the US basically, but our population is about 2/3 of what California's population is. So we're quite a vast and sparsely populated country. And that also leads to little pockets, isolated pockets where you've got these unique stands of trees where they are endemic to those little areas like Jarrah or Huon pine, which we'll get into. The second half of the talk will be not so much in the PowerPoint presentation, it'll just be some photos that I've gathered of some Australian makers. Australia has a lot of makers that go under the radar or have gone under the radar throughout history, but there's been a lot of talented guys and a lot of really unique influences because people migrated here from all around the world and they came up with their own flavors. And because of the different properties of Australian timbers and the different visual characteristics, they've tweaked these styles to suit that. So I thought it would be really cool to show you guys some of the work. The picture of the man there in the photo is a guy called Jeffrey Hanna. He's still alive. He'd be in his mid to late 70s. He is a lovely guy, and he's one of the most skilled cabinet makers in Australia. He doesn't strictly work in Australian timbers, but he builds some of the most magnificent cabinets, you know, where he'll spend 6 or 7 years working on them, and they'll have 200 sort of drawers and secret compartments. So I thought it'd be fitting to have him here. I'll talk about him later on. Okay, so Australia. So you guys can see the map of Australia there on the right-hand side. To give you an idea of scale, can you guys see my mouse pointer on the screen or no?
Yep, we can.
We can. Okay, cool. So over here in the west, we've got Perth, named after Perth in Scotland. And over here in this orange state called New South Wales, you've got Sydney. To give you an idea of scale, to drive from Sydney to Perth, there's a few curves, but there's a lot of straight lines. That's, you guys all work in miles, that's 2,400 miles. So that's the same distance essentially as New York to LA, to give you a rough idea. I'm based here in Melbourne, which is in the state of Victoria. And you've got this state down here, Tasmania, the island state. And you've also got, so these are the main states. I'm going to talk about Queensland, the green state here. So running, sorry, my screen is just messing with me. Yep, so if you can see my pointer again, running along where my pointer is. So basically from, let's say, around here, up in the north, the far north of Queensland, all the way down to Brisbane, and then all the way down to Melbourne is sort of this green belt. And the Great Dividing Range, which is a mountain range, it's a hill range really compared to the European Alps, that basically runs all the way up pretty much to here. To the right-hand side of that is that green area where we've got a lot of lush forests. The interior of Australia is arid. That's what you imagine as being like the outback. So most of the trees used in furniture come from this sort of area here on the east coast. And then there's a pocket just south of Perth. So there's Margaret River and Busselton and the Stirling Ranges down here. And that's where timbers like Jarrah and Carry, which I'll go into later on, that's where they come from. And they only grow in that region. They don't grow anywhere else in Australia. So I've gone through the size of Australia. So it's, 36 times bigger than GB. So it's pretty big. The other thing is that we've got a lot of endemic species. So species that are only found in Australia. We're this island. We're the largest island in the world, the smallest continent in the world. And so we're surrounded by water. So a lot of the stuff, that's what makes a lot of it endemic and unique to Australia. By comparison, I believe the US has about 30% endemic species. And when I looked up the UK or Britain, you guys don't have anything endemic because most of the species you have, or all of the species, they'll have on the continent. So that's what makes Australia so unique. And this is why a lot of stuff just flies under the radar, because people don't even know this stuff exists, or these species exist. So we have, when you say Australian timbers, you're probably thinking of like gum trees. That's your sort of stereotypical Australian landscape is gum trees in the desert or something. So gum trees fall under eucalypts. Eucalypts, that's the overarching name. And then you've got three categories underneath that. So you've got eucalyptus, which is about 700 plus species. Then you've got corymbias, which are about 100 plus species. And then you've got the angophoras, which are about a dozen or so species. Most of the furniture making timbers or joinery timbers fit in that eucalyptus category and the corymbia category. So spotted gum, which I used on my workbench, and that's a well-known construction timber that's bushfire rated because it's so hard and dense and burns so slowly and in a controlled way. That's a corymbia. So eucalyptus trees are not all rock hard. Some of them are shrubby little things. Some of them are softer. Give me a second. They can range. You've got, I don't know if you can see me on the camera. Can you guys see me at all?
Whoever's recording, if they switch on like side by side, speak.
Okay. You don't have to. I can describe it. So we've got some eucalyptuses that you can actually dent with your fingernail. So stuff that would probably be 400 kilo to the cube in terms of density. Let's just say I think mahogany is around that 500 to 600 kilo per cubic meter, so softer than mahogany. And then you've got eucalyptus and corymbias that are up around about 1,000 or even over 1,000 kilo per cube. So that's the same as water. So you've got eucalyptus and corymbias that will sink even when dry. We've also got acacias. We call them wattles. That's just their nickname here, their informal name in Australia. So that's our national tree. So the national tree is the golden wattle tree, which grows in the southeast, so in Melbourne and in Sydney. It's a beautiful tree. It's bad if you've got hay fever like me. But I mean, acacias are central to our culture. We've got over 1,000 species of acacia. Acacias include Gidgee, that's a desert acacia, and they also include Tasmanian blackwood, which I'll get into, which is strongly related to the koa tree, so a very famous lutherie timber used in guitar making. Then in Queensland, in that green state, we've also got a lot of a species or a group of species called Flindasias, which sort of bridge the gap. They're very hard and dense, like some of the corymbias or eucalyptus species, but they've got a grain structure, a long, less interlocked grain structure that lends itself more to European workability. These have a lot of applicability in furniture, but they are really dying out in terms of popularity. I should also let you guys know that they are cutting down on commercial hardwood logging. So Victoria and Western Australia, so Victoria, where I won't go too far into it, but we've got quite a large number of hardwood species used in furniture and joinery. And West Australia has a famous jarrah tree. They've stopped logging, or they stopped it in January 2024, so 2 years ago. So people are hoarding all these joinery timbers, which have gone up in price because you can't cut them down anymore, basically. New South Wales and Queensland are going to follow the act, or the rest of Australia will eventually follow the act. And in Tasmania, the island state, there've already been bans for the past, 30 or 40 years on certain species, which I'll get into. So they are, cutting down on commercial hardwood logging, although there's a lot of up and coming agroforestry. So a lot of farmers are purposely planting certain species, which they know they can harvest and sell off later on down the track. Because they use them as windbreaks and things like that. Like I said, a lot of Australia is very wide and open. And so having windbreaks, and also for native fauna, native animals, it's important for farmers to sometimes have certain species of trees, which they then put up for sale. A bit like what Hugh's doing in the UK with boxwood. So I guess we'll go state by state. I've just basically got slides like that, and I've got a list of hardwoods, or not hardwoods, furniture woods, I should say, on my phones to prompt me as to which one to grab. So I'm going to start off with Tasmania, and you saw Tasmania's way down here, really far down south. Tasmania, again, like I was saying, Australia is already quite isolated because the mainland is an island. Tasmania is an island off the coast of Australia, and it's even more isolated. And there's a lot of UNESCO World Heritage listed areas where they have some really, really unique landscapes and trees growing. So this is a photo of the southwest of Tassie, where I looked up what the weather is like, and apparently it's very similar to the Scottish Highlands. So a lot of rain, a lot of sleet, just damp, cold, and dark, basically. Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the place is called Fort William.
Yep.
But it's basically like Fort William in terms of climate and the wind and everything. So what that lends itself to is slow growing trees. So I'll get started with Hue and Pine. So I don't know if you can see it here. This is hewn pine. It's classified as a softwood, but it's not. Hewn pine is a lot harder than, regular white pine or something like that. Extremely slow growing. When I say slow growing, they say it takes a hewn pine at least 500 to 800 years to get to a size where it's mature enough to be cut down for use. So a
Scott,
lot
we're
of
only
this.
seeing the Tasmania, the island state picture up. We're not seeing what you're showing.
Oh,
Now we're just
We
seeing the
can
map.
see you on a small screen on the side. I was just about to interrupt
Okay.
myself.
Okay.
That's
Hang on.
better. Yeah. Stop your screen share in between if you're going to show us the timbers.
Okay. Can you see the my PowerPoint again?
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. Okay.
But then if you switch off the PowerPoint, then we can see you. We can see the timbers better.
Okay. Easy. Okay. So I guess you guys saw. Let me just click back on the screen. You guys saw that picture of Tasmania. So that sort of gives you an idea as to the climate and what it looks like where it would be growing. So that's the what is it? The Western Arthurs mountain range. Very remote, basically. So I'm going to stop sharing.
There you go. Now we see.
You can see the timber. Don't forget, this is webcam. The white balance may play up, so it might not look true to what it actually is. But basically, I'll try to find something similar. Give me a second. I'm going to try to find where I can a European or an American equivalent so that you've got a control and you can compare and say, oh, yeah, that looks similar. So boxwood, right? Like this is from Jim Hendrix, an offcut of boxwood. It's basically the same color as boxwood. You can see that side's not got any oil or finish on it. So they're basically identical in color. If you think boxwood is slow growing, hewn pine is even slower growing. It's
Can I interrupt for a second, Siggy? Is it an evergreen?
It is, yes.
It's the same as like Northern Hemisphere pines, where it's an evergreen and has pine-like needles. Needle-like leaves.
It does.
Evergreen,
it has,
and it's relatively quick growing because of it.
No. This hewn pine is totally different. It's slow growing because, it's a very unique. I'm not a botanist, but I know there's pretty much nothing else related to it. And it only grows in Tasmania. You don't find it growing anywhere else in the world. But I mean, to give you an idea, can you see this board? This is 35 millimeters thick. I can't convert that to inches off the top of my head, but so 35 mil. Last night I counted the rings on there, took a photo of it. So it's flat sawn, I should say.
Just under an inch and a half, Siggy.
Over an inch and a half? Okay.
Just under an inch and a half.
Under an inch and a half. So I don't know if you can see it, but it's basically flat sawn. Now I counted along that 35 millimeter how many growth rings there were. And this is nothing special. This was just a piece of timber that came from my windowsill. So it's not some, extreme example of some old growth, slow grown hewn pine. But I counted, and I don't know if you can see it on my screen. Oops. But there's a lot of growth rings.
Yep.
I counted. Yeah, so under a loop, because there's actually some rings in between the big bold ones, I counted 74. So that's 74 years in, was it 35 millimeters? So that's just to give you an idea of how slow growing it is. Chris Vespa, who makes measuring tools and things like that, some of you might know him from Handworks or from Cressing Temple Barns. He has a slice that he brought back from Tasmania, just a bit of end grain. And I think he counted under his loop about 1,600 or 1,700 years, maybe even 2,000 years. Don't hold me to that, but it was just ridiculous. And it's only on like a length, a strip about that long. So it's extremely slow growing. It's actually protected. So they can't cut these hewn pine trees down. The only way to harvest it is basically from the bottoms of lakes, and bodies of water that have basically the trees have fallen into. And there's a company down there called Hydrawood, and they have a barge basically with an excavator on it, and it uses sonar, and they've got this special sort of an attachment that's on the end of the arm of the excavator, and they basically pick these logs up off the bottom of the floor of these lakes. And I believe there are only about 3 or 4 sawmills, and they're historic sawmills. They're not huge, massive operations that are allowed by the government, that have a permit to actually cut hewn pine logs up. So it is, yeah, very well protected. It's considered the best boat building timber in the world. So because it's so slow growing, it's actually got a lot of properties of hardwoods in terms of durability, but it's loaded with oils and extractives, which allow it to be submerged in water. And this is one of the reasons they can fish it up from the bottom of lakes. It basically doesn't rot. And so when you've got these logs that have been underwater for hundreds of years, they basically scrape off the grey sort of oxidized outer layer, which is only just, I don't know, 5 mil thick, maybe a centimeter thick, not that deep at all. And it's just a protective layer. It's not actually even rotting. And straight away underneath, you've got this beautiful boxwood sort of golden colored timber. And it just works like a dream. It's my favorite Australian timber to work because cutting tools just plow through it. I mean, I took some shavings last night. This is just with my number 7 jointer. And you can see, you can get nice wispy thin shavings, full length shavings. And I didn't even sharpen this plane. It was just straight off the shelf there. It's just a wonderful timber to work. It has a smell that is just amazing. In fact, growing up, when I would work with my dad in his workshop at Christmas time, he'd make Christmas ornaments as gifts for people, and we would pack them in parcels of hewn pine shavings because it smells. It's got a strong smell, like perhaps like cedar of Lebanon or something. I mean, it's a different smell, but pungent like that, and sort of how can you say, nice and sweet like that as well. It comes in burl form as well, which is highly desirable. This is a lump of hewn pine burl. I've just put some finish on this, so it's got that golden color. Very rare these days, and this is actually really quite dense stuff. I've got some photos later on under the makers section where I've got some furniture, examples of furniture, I should say, made from hewn pine, and it's a stunning timber. Next one from Tassie. So you can actually get all of the timbers that I'm showing now, you guys can actually get in both solid timber and veneer form. None of them are illegal, like none of them are CITES listed or CITES listed. I don't think there's a single Australian timber that is CITES listed. So you can contact people like Peter McCurley at Curly Timbers or Will Flotman at Creative Soul Timbers or whatever it's called, his business, and you can actually get any of these timbers. That's why I wanted to focus on them. So they're not exclusive. Anything I have, you can get to. The next timber from Tasmania is a shrubbier, smaller tree called musk. I'll start off with what musk realistically looks like. This is also sort of a mid hard wood. It's not really a true hardwood or a softwood in terms of workability. You can hand plane this quite easily. It's got a greenish golden sort of hue to it. This stuff is really prized for its veneer, especially its burr veneer or burl veneer, because the little the pattern essentially looks like little faces looking at you, like little monkey faces. And so it was really quite a desirable timber and veneer form, used on, frame and panel sort of construction for door panels and stuff on cabinets. Spectacular timber. Alrighty. I'm going to sort of cross over now into Victoria. So if I just quickly share screen again so that you guys can get a refresh as to where we are. So we're in Tassie. So hue and pine grows on the west coast, basically. And musk also grows on that west coast area as well. So we're going to go now to Victoria. So Melbourne's here in the center. Let me stop sharing screen. I'm going to talk about Australian blackwood. Some of you might have heard of it as being referred to as Tasmanian blackwood. So that's the blackwood that grows in Tasmania. We just call it Tasmanian blackwood. And the stuff that grows in Victoria, we just call, well, it grows in a region, the Otways, which is a rainforest. Oh, it's a forest region, I should say, in Victoria. So we call that stuff Otways blackwood. There are some subtle differences, mainly in the color. Both can be highly figured. The Otways blackwood is more of a golden brown and is the more generally desirable, especially amongst luthiers. It's a fantastic guitar timber. This is Tasmanian blackwood. So you can see it's very much like walnut. Blackwood is the Australian analog to walnut, just because of the coloring, its workability as well, so long as it's not too dry. So you want it to be about that 10% moisture content. If it's less than that, it can chip out and play up, which you don't want, especially on a spindle boulder. This is straight grained blackwood. Now I'm going to compare this to some rather figured pieces that I have of Otways blackwood. So you can see there's quite a lot of color variation. This is what we call master grade, or it's basically guitar grade fancy blackwood from the Otways. Here's another piece of master grade blackwood from the Otways. The stuff from the Otways, you'll notice, has a lot of sort of dark brown streaks and light brown streaks. So it's got this sort of flame sort of appearance to it as well, not just the curl in the figuring. And that's really desirable. I mean, if you imagine this being book matched on the back of a guitar, it's really quite spectacular. This is closely related to Hawaiian koa. It has more dense and tightly packed figuring than Hawaiian koa. And it's, in a way, similar to Gidgee. Gidgee is basically a distilled version of blackwood in terms of its figuring. So you can buy this timber very readily, very easily in veneer and board form. It's really easy to get a hold of. So that's our analog to walnut. I'm going to make a quick detour back into Tasmania again because I just realized I forgot this timber. There's another timber called Myrtle Beech, or we just call it myrtle. It's different to European beech, but it's a relative of. It has this sort of salmon pink hue. When it gets infected, you know, like with spalting, it produces this particular figuring that is really, really desirable. And it's called tiger myrtle. You get these sort of stripes, these black stripes or dots occurring. And this is an example I got from Chris Searle. He's a timber getter. So he basically goes into old logging coops and cuts timber and carries it out by hand. And he got this from an old growth myrtle forest. Myrtle burl, or tiger myrtle burl. So it's a burl, and it's hard to see on the camera, but it's also got this black striping and curls through it. I actually wanted to send this to Shane Skelton for a saw handle, but I realized it wasn't thick enough. So I have to find another use for it. Was there any questions so far, or did you want me to keep motoring through?
I'm going to guess that the spalting on the myrtle is different than the rest of the world, because spalting on beech sometimes can become a bit punky and soft. Is it any difference in its durability or its using? It's probably dense the whole. It's just the coloration of it. As far as I'm aware, in beech it's like a fungus that actually grows through the grain.
So it's not destructive, or at least they must. This stuff is at a state where it's not like destroyed the structural integrity of the timber. Um, it machines exactly the same. There's no weak spots. There's no punkiness. There's no holes or anything like that. It literally looks like it's just been dyed in those spots.
And the spalting comes from dampness in the timber actually running through it, the same as
Yeah.
European timbers.
Yes. I
So
mean, don't
when it's
forget.
left outside and under the elements and stuff like that, the spalting will actually run through the boards naturally.
I believe so. I'm not an expert on it, but I mean, to give you a rough idea, this all comes from that same sort of climate as what you have in Scotland. So it is going to be cold, damp, and wet sort of a climate, which is conducive to this occurring. It is quite rare, though. It doesn't happen to all myrtle trees. In I mean, to give you an idea, when I came back from Tasmania with these pieces that I bought from Chris, I showed them to my dad, who's worked in the industry, with some pretty high end furniture, and at the gallery since he's been in Australia since 1973, and that was the first time he said that he'd seen it in the hands of just a regular Joe. Like he was saying how they use tiger myrtle for certain restoration work, but he didn't have any tiger myrtle himself. You can buy it. I'm not saying it's impossible to get. It's just that it's not common. It's not even that expensive, I don't think. When I bought this stuff, I mean, I got a few pieces for $30. He gave me a few nice lengths. So it's not the same price as boxwood or something. It's a lot more affordable than that. It's probably like getting some nice piece of burl oak maybe or something. Yeah, so you can definitely get that. But no, the spalting is not actually they're not weak spots in the timber. Sorry, my mind's all over the place. I haven't drunk my coffee. Did you have any other questions, Scott?
From me, no. Has anyone else got any questions I want to ask just now? See, there's a pause. There's no hands up, Siggy, so
Okay, I can hear you guys even though I'm not on the screen because I've got my earbuds on. So
nobody's
not
put their hand
ignoring
up
you.
to ask any questions at the moment, so I would continue.
Okay, cool. What's the next timber we're going to go into? Shit, I've got timbers everywhere here. Maybe if we go, give me a sec. I'll just look at my list of timbers. Sorry, folks. Bear with me. So I've gone through Blackwood, we've gone through Huon Pine, done Musk, we've done Tiger Myrtle. Okay, we'll go north a little bit. So if I'll share my screen again. So we're going to go now to Queensland and New South Wales. So as we work our way north, we're going the opposite way than in Europe. We're going up towards the equator. So up here is Port Moresby, that's Papua New Guinea. So the equator is basically just up here. So as we go north, we're going more into like tropical rainforests. The climate is a little bit different. So the timbers start changing. So let me stop sharing. So where shall we start? I spoke earlier about Flindasias having the hardness and the durability of eucalypts, but the workability of European sort of timbers. One of them is this one, Queensland maple. So you'll probably start noticing that I'm going to use words like oak, blackwood, maple, ash. They're not actually related to real maples, ashes, and blackwoods. These are just colloquial names that the early settlers gave to these timbers because they reminded them of those timbers back home in Europe. So Queensland maple is a Flindasia. It's not an Acer or whatever the botanical name is for maples. It's not related to rock maple or sugar maple. It is a totally different tree, but it can resemble hard maple. It is slightly darker. This stuff is probably similar in terms of workability as European beech. This one is just a plain grained. It's got kind of a ripple to it, but it can have really beautiful figuring, just like your quilted maple. In fact, this is a really popular tone wood and guitar timber here in Australia. So Queensland maple, it's fantastic for furniture as well. Something darker. This is black bean. Black bean's my favorite Australian timber. It's getting harder. It's not hard to find, but it is getting harder to find, mainly because it's a carcinogen. So they're actually using this timber in cancer research here in Australia. So it is slightly poisonous, the fumes, the dust, which we'll get into when we talk about working with Australian timbers, but it has this similar color to Brazilian rosewood. Give me a second. Here's a piece of Brazilian rosewood. So same chocolatey color, but it has a grain, this sort of open grain that looks a little bit like, this is bog oak, but it sort of has a little bit like oak in a way. So it's a bit of a mishmash between oak, in looks between rosewood and oak. A beautiful timber, very popular in mid-century sort of furniture. I've got some examples of it that I'll show you later on in photographs. Yeah, fantastic timber. I worked a lot with it when I was working with my mentor, Frank Wiesner up in Queensland, because he actually cut down a bunch of black bean trees at one stage himself, and he had a huge stash of 5-inch thick slabs that we were using for furniture. The next one that I'll get into is a carving timber. So you guys, what's the timber you guys use in Europe? Is it linden? Is it basswood?
Linden, basswood, it's the same, yeah.
So our analog is Queensland white beech. It's not related to beech. It basically, this is, my dad calls this chicken breast timber because it carves like chicken breast. That's what he says as a joke. I've got examples that I'll show in photographs of work done in Queensland white beech by some of the best wood carvers in Australia. Is a fantastic timber that sort of, again, it's a mid-weight timber. It's not quite a softwood, it's not quite a hardwood when compared to European species, but a beautiful timber nonetheless. Yeah. Another slightly interesting timber that we have is red gum. Red gum is the most commonly found eucalyptus tree in Australia. It grows pretty much all over the place, along all the waterways, because that's where a lot of birds and animals will basically make their homes. Every now and then a red gum tree will fall into the waterways and get buried, essentially like bog oak. And our analog to bog oak is ancient red gum. It's basically had the same process occur to it as bog oak. The difference is, and it's kind of hard to show on this camera, is that it has a much tighter grain structure. It's harder and heavier than bog oak. And you get like figuring in it. It's hard to see in that piece of timber because it's black. But it's a beautiful timber that, again, it's not CITES listed. You can get it, and it's wonderful for using it in areas where you would use ebony, for example. It's easier to get a hold of than ebony. So there you go. Another one that you guys might be interested in. Got one more veneer here. Sorry, it's a little bit ad hoc. This here is Queensland walnut. I put some shellac on this side, and this side is the untreated side, with the tape parting them in the middle. In the north, they used to use this as a replacement for European or American walnut as an analog, whereas in the south, we would use black wood. This is not walnut. Again, it's just a colloquial name they gave it because it resembled walnut in coloring. But the characteristic thing about Queensland walnut that people like are these stripes. So it kind of has stripes a little bit like Macassar ebony, but the coloring is like the walnut that you're used to. And it's a beautiful timber. You can get it again in solid form or in veneer. It's just an offcut of veneer my dad gave me. And it looks wonderful when it's used en masse. So my dad actually made at my parents' place his desk and a wall unit from Queensland walnut, and with the stripes, it just looks really, really nice. Just with that grain carrying along those items as they sit side by side. Oh, I almost forgot about West Australia. So let me just share that map again so you guys get a rough idea. So we spoke about the timbers in Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, and Tasmania. There's nothing too different here in South Australia in Adelaide. That region is known mainly for its wine and tuna fishing. Now we're going to go basically to Perth here on the other side. So about 3 hours drive south of Perth, or 4 hours, there's this sort of area here, and that's called Margaret River. And in this area, this very famous species of timber called jarrah grows. And you can see this is typically what the forests in West Australia look like. These are karri trees, another eucalyptus that grows out there, but jarrah grows under similar sort of circumstances. Jarrah is a beautiful timber. I used it in my workbench. That's probably the best way I can show it to you. If the camera can reach, I don't know if you guys can see it. That's basically jarrah there. So it's a dark, deep red-colored hardwood. Very hard and dense. It's probably about 850 kilo to the cubic meter. Hard maple is about 700 kilo. So it's harder than hard maple. Again, I've got some more photos that I'll show later on of some makers' work in that timber. So was there any questions till now about the timbers? Oh God, that's my wife outside. Give me a second, guys. Is everything okay?
Yeah, we come to say hello and show you the apple.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Hey, Tia, thank you.
There's an apple for Papa.
I'll get back to the talk.
Okay.
Thanks for the apple, Tia. Sorry about that, guys. The joys of having a baby. Okay. So if I go back to... Yeah, so I think I've hit the end of my talk on the timbers. So I've gone through some of the timbers. This is not an exhaustive list of all the furniture timbers. I've just gone through what I had here in stock in my workshop, and probably the easiest ones that you guys can get a hold of in veneer form and in board or lumber form. Did you guys have any questions so far about any of the species? Or
There's no hands up, Siggy.
okay,
Does anyone get any questions they want to ask? Remember, stick your hand up if you want to ask any questions.
Siggy,
yeah.
Sorry, the names are not sticking.
That's all right.
When down in Victoria,
Mm-hmm.
you had was it Blackwood?
I did, yes, Blackwood.
Yeah, the one that there was like one version from Taz. Yeah.
Yep.
What kind of weight density is that?
What kind of density? It varies depending on where it grows. So sometimes the Tasmanian stuff is slightly more dense because it's cooler down there where it grows, and it'll grow just a little bit slower. It also depends on what trees grow around it, how much shade it gets, etc. The stuff that's exposed to more sunlight will grow faster and be slightly less dense. In terms of how dense it is, in general, it's very similar, probably a bit more than black walnut. It's probably more sort of between beech and walnut.
Okay.
So it works very well by hand, especially the straight grain stuff. And to give you an idea what straight grain stuff is, like my tool cabinet I made from blackwood. Not all blackwood is disfigured. This is just an extreme example that I pulled out and sanded and oiled just to show you guys how different it can be.
Yeah.
The difficulty.
If you were buying that, I don't know what your structure is in Australia, but here in France, it's like it's a price per cubic meter and subdivided, whatever. So what sort of prices would you be looking at on something like that?
On this?
Yeah.
So it depends who you're friendly with. So I got a couple.
I was just if you went into a commercial situation and purchasing
if anyone wants any really figured stuff like that, and it doesn't have to be this big, it can be. Hang on, give me a second. Like if you want to make a little jewelry box or something, or a keepsake box, and you just this is some more blackwood with figuring. If you just want a piece like that, I don't want to quote any prices because I got these pieces 5-6 years ago, and I got them cheaper because I'm friendly with the guy who cut this timber, but also because it was freshly cut, so it was still wet at the time, and he sold them to me for cheap because they had bark inclusions on them, and he didn't have the time to dry them out, and it was kind of like, Siggy, you get it cheap at your own risk because it might crack. I mean, all that figuring comes from tension and forces within the timber.
Yeah.
And so when you do get something figured like that, or even the musk burl, which I got from the same guy, and that was also wet, the best way to dry it out is to get what I found, a Hessian sack. And I load that Hessian sack with nice shavings of jarrah or another species that was kiln dried. I'll thickness a board or something and keep all those nice big thick chips, and I'll basically bury this in that bag because that slows the drying out process. And then I'll basically empty that bag or replenish the shavings so that it doesn't get too damp in there and encourage mold growth, basically.
So you'd be looking probably about 3 years over an inch or something like that.
Yes, that's exactly right. I mean, this stuff is an inch material, and I'd say that it came down to about 11 or 12% moisture content about 2 years ago. So yeah, 3 years. I had it for about 3 years. If you want to contact a person for timber like that, the best guy is a guy called Willie Vlotman, Creative Soul Timbers. He is on Instagram. The other guy for bigger pieces, if anyone wants to make a guitar. So I think this piece in particular I got from Peter McCurley. So he's on Instagram as Curly Timbers. If anyone wants the links, just hit me up or message me on Facebook and I can connect you. But those guys are small-time timber getters. So they go to extreme lengths to get really decent timber. A lot of their clients or people that they sell timber to are in the US, a lot of knife makers. Those guys, for example, Peter McCurley, he does a lot of outback timbers as well. So Gidgee and Mulga and all of that. He'll do a 3,000-mile round trip in his car with a couple of chainsaws in the back and tungsten tipped chains to harvest those timbers, and he dries them out himself. So they are extremely knowledgeable, and if you approach them, they're very friendly, and you just tell them what you want, what sort of use you want it for, and they will find that right piece of timber for you.
Right.
Yeah.
No, it's just, I mean, I think you held up a piece of the burl as well.
Yes.
Just stunning. Absolutely
Oh.
stunning.
Oh, when you see the photos later on of how they're used in furniture, it's pretty incredible.
I guess my mind's eye, I'm putting a finish on it, and I'm seeing how it's going to explode.
Absolutely.
But it just absolutely gorgeous.
Absolutely.
Phil, you carry on, Phil.
Yeah, Phil.
Yeah, Phil said his hand up to ask a question.
Yeah, Siggy, you a lot of names you said that some of them I've never heard of, a lot of them I've sort of heard of.
Mm-hmm.
Could I be a bit of a pain in the ass and trouble you to put a chart down and then email it so we can email it round? So we've got the names, where they come from, the sort of colour they are, and the sort of uses. Because when I go into one of the local timber merchants here, there's one about 20, 30 miles away who do a lot, and they had a lot of Australian stuff in last time. I looked at it and I thought, what's this? What do I use it for? It looks nice, but what's its properties and things like that? It'd be really, really helpful if you could just jot it down on a spreadsheet or something.
Certainly.
If you could throw some of the photos of what you've got in it, that would be really, really helpful when I go looking for something because I want to make a jewelry box or something like that.
Yes.
It'd be really helpful saying, I see that. Oh, I look at Ziggy's list and, right, that could be useful.
Absolutely. Yep.
Sorry
I'll do
to
that.
trouble you, but it's
no.
I'm really fascinated by what you're saying. But I know that come next week, it will have been gone.
You've forgotten it.
Yeah,
that's totally cool. So the idea of this talk was more to prompt interest in it, and I am open to anyone reaching out and contacting me if you want to know anything or who to talk to. If I don't know about it, and it's impossible for me to know about Australian timbers. Like, I'm not a professional woodworker. I just have an interest in them. But I do know people who will know more about certain species than me. So if I can help connect you with the right person, I'm more than willing to do so. So I will do that. I'll put together a list for you. No worries.
Okay. That's great. Thank you.
That's okay.
I have a question, Siggy.
Absolutely.
Like myself, so we're both on the screen. What do you know about commercially grown timbers in Australia? Do they actually grow them commercially so they do harvest them? You're talking a lot about trees, and it sounds like they're starting to become protected because they're becoming rarer. And that sounds like a bit kind of, if we were to equate that to what's happening in the rainforests, they're actually kind of like they were going through and taking swathes of like the trees away to sell them.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that was probably happening to a certain extent in Australia. But are some of these timbers that you've mentioned so far, are they commercially grown?
Well, the thing about Australian timbers is they tend to grow. They take a lot longer to grow.
Right.
So a lot of it was just, I can't speak too much of how the forests are managed here because I don't know enough about the subject. But I know that a lot of the commercial harvesting was just occurring on old growth forests.
Okay.
Let me just share screen again, just to give you a rough idea. So you know what a lot of these trees, like the more commonly found trees, give me a sec. Okay. Can you see this picture, Victoria?
Yep.
Okay, so this is, I believe this is a Dandenong Ranger. So there's Melbourne, and then there's about 35 k's out of Melbourne, there's this hill called Mount Dandenong. And this is very, very typical of what the forest there looks like. These trees are one of the most commonly harvested hardwoods, or were one of the most commonly harvested hardwoods used in joinery and furniture and everything. This is what we call Vic ash or Tasmanian oak. It's basically eucalyptus. There are three eucalyptuses. There's Eucalyptus regnans, obliqua, and I forget the third one. But this one in the photo you see in particular is Eucalyptus regnans. They were logging these and using them, and they still do in Tasmania, where logging's not quite phased out yet, in the manufacture of paper. So they were just sending them straight to the wood chipper, which is a shame. These are the tallest flowering plants in the world. I think they get up to about 100 meters tall. There's one in Tasmania called Centurion, which is over 100 meters tall. So this is one of the more commercially harvested species. Gosh, in terms of what you were actually asking though, Scott, I'm just trying to rack my brain a bit.
It's just
I know
okay,
that
I'll tell you where I was going with that.
Yeah.
I don't think we can relate anything that we've got here to anything that's in Australia at all. I think it's totally different. I think it's wood, right? So, but the names you give them, like oak and ash, they aren't really related to oak and ash at all.
They're not at all.
And when you showed that bit of timber that had the figure on it, the kind of the deep lines going across it, I can't remember which timber it was. You're showing quite a lot. It's hard to remember them. Yeah, that one there.
Black bean? Yeah.
No, not that one.
Let me just...
The other one with the kind of lines going across it.
Oh. Oops.
Some high figure going across it. No, not that one. You see, this is the thing. There's that. You showed that many. It was a board that was narrower at one end. It was right in front of you. It was on your bench in front of you. And it looked a lot like kind of like similarities to fiddleback ash.
Oh, fiddleback.
And that's why I was saying about commercially, because commercially ash will grow straight grained, and a lot of the times that's because the tree's protected by the other ash trees next to it. And when you get fiddleback ash, it's like a specimen tree, so it's a standalone tree in a field. And what will happen is, you mentioned about the tensions in the timber. That was the one you were talking about, the tensions in the timber. And what will happen with the standalone specimen tree is it's subject to the wind blowing it backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. And that's where you get that grain actually doing that and getting the depth of the grain, the chatoyance in it.
I'm with you.
Fiddleback in it. And it looked similar to that. I just wondered if it was commercially grown and whether these trees were all standalone or whether they were grown in forests at all.
I'm going to say they're all standalone. They wouldn't be commercially grown. Because they just simply take too long.
Right.
Yeah. I know Jarrah, at one stage they stopped the harvesting of old growth Jarrah. So the old growth Jarrah has that really deep red sort of colouring. And suddenly it went to more sort of, I wouldn't say salmon coloured, but it was definitely lighter. It was more pinkish. And that was from faster growing. So I guess you could say that was sort of more so commercially grown trees, where they were exposed more so to light and they had more airflow going through to encourage them to grow faster. But in terms of like plantations, I don't believe we really had that many like true like eucalyptus plantations.
Right, okay.
Eucalypt plantations, yeah. Most of the really figured timbers, especially the stuff that comes from Tasmania, are from those small-time timber getters. So there are these people who have applied for and have a license from the government to basically go back into logging coops and reclaim stuff that has fallen down or stuff that was not economically viable for the government or for these corporations to harvest. So that's like all that blackwood. The Otways blackwood is a little bit different. There's a guy there called Murray Kidman, and I don't know the terms of his license, but I believe he's the only guy in Victoria who has a particular license where he's allowed to go into these old growth forests and he's allowed to look for trees and read the trees for the most figured trees. And I think he's allowed to cut down like 1 or 2 trees every year or so, and he has to carry out the timber by hand. So there's actually a fascinating video of him on YouTube. And he basically walks into the forest with a chainsaw. He cuts a tree down. He gets his little axe out, his marking axe, and he marks the lengths and everything. And he cuts them into boards on the forest floor that are about 1 meter long. Now, he's basically harvesting these boards for a well-known guitar manufacturer here in Melbourne called Maitland Guitars. And he will then just throw a hessian sack on his back and he carries the boards out on his back to his car. Yeah. And I think that's part of the conditions that the government sort of imposes on him so that he can't just go in there with like a tractor and drag these trees out. But I believe he's the only guy who's doing that, who's got that license. And he's an older guy. He'd be in his 70s now. And he was doing it with his son, who would probably be in his mid to late 40s. Can you guys give me a sec? I just grabbed some grease before, and I just need to wash my hands.
Sure.
Laundry's just over here, so sorry about that.
So, I mean, that's incredibly strict conditions, isn't it? Because, I mean, you do hear, obviously, of other areas where they don't want to do a lot of damage to natural forests. But in those conditions, you know, they quite often allow horses to be used to pull out timbers because, you know, they do so little damage in comparison to a tractor or a tracked machine running through the forest. So it's amazing that they sort of make it such a tight restriction of you've got
it
to
is
timber out. You know?
It is. I will, if I can. I'm not fast enough or quick enough on YouTube to do so, but I will try to find that video and I will post it in the chat. It's got no talking, nothing. It's just amazing because like the way he goes in there and he harvests it. If you forget the fact that he's got a brand new steel chainsaw, it's just like prehistoric. He's literally, it's similar to footage I've seen in Asia where they cut down Vietnamese rosewood trees, you know, illegally. And those guys out in the middle of a jungle are carrying these billets of rosewood. It's the same thing. He's just this guy slogging it through the forest, carrying these parcels on the back of on his back on a Hessian sack. It's phenomenal.
We've actually got a question from Shrenik as well. He's got his hand up. So
yeah. Go for it.
I just had his spotlight for you. Go, Shrenik.
Morning, Siggy.
Morning.
I had a couple of things. Well, one was I find it crazy in London. We have eucalyptus trees growing on the side of the road in random parts of London. And those trees only grow to about 10 to 15 meters high. They're quite low trees, but the really interesting thing is that timber. As soon as I found out, eucalyptus must be Australian. There was the council had one of the trees being cut down, so I went and had a look, and I thought, let me ask them if I can grab a log. So I dried it, and this was during COVID. Managed to get it, or maybe just before COVID. Managed to get the log, dried it for a bit, and I just didn't. The grain was so twisted
no substance. Yeah.
Sorry,
it's got no body, no substance to it. The one's grown.
No, but the grain was so twisted, even on the straight length of it, that it just wasn't workable.
Right.
I wouldn't have been able to use it for anything practical because the second I cut it in half, it literally started twisting to straighten out. And that was when it was reasonably dry. It'd been drying in the round for probably about 4 years at that point.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's they do for some reason store an immense amount of internal tension. That was actually one of the slides I didn't actually get to was working with the Australian timbers. My brain sort of just jumped over that. Let me just share screen again. Okay. There you go. So you can see the slide there. That's my mate Frank before he passed away. And we were actually milling black butt and spotted gum. These are legs for a stool that he made, which I'll show you a photo of later on. So what you were talking about there, Shrenik, is the greater internal stresses. And it's actually quite readable on a lot of trees. You'll just walk down the streets and you actually see, because a lot of eucalypts, they will have bark on the base that looks like it's almost shedding, and then they'll have this nice smooth trunk above it. And you can quite often see when you look at the bark, you'll see it like a helix, like actually working its way around, and you can tell that that tree has this twist in it. So like you're saying, if you were to cut it, those boards would just whoop, like a drill bit. Yeah. Did you want me to run through these points here just quickly?
Yeah, but do it.
Okay.
I'll come back with my question after.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, like, as you all know, that we've got some timbers with some abnormally high densities and Janka hardnesses. So we've got a significant portion of timbers, joinery and furniture timbers that sit in that region where I'm just thinking of the analog is in European timbers and American timbers, in that hickory, mesquite, if you're American, or even ipe in that region of hardness. So Scott mentioned to me the other day when I spoke to him when we caught up to talk about edge tools. So, I mean, we think about the woodworkers being the romantic with the hand planes and the paring chisels. And is it like that in Australia? Well, with certain timbers, you can do that. With blackwood, with Queensland maple, with hewn pine, you definitely can. But with a lot of the harder woods, you're going to have to put that sort of part of your brain aside, that romantic part of your brain aside, and embrace abrasives. Embrace abrasives. That's a tongue twister. When you go into a lot of commercial woodworking factories, you'll see that they replace all their hand planes with the Merkur sanders or Festool sanders, and they'll all have disc sanders, edge sanders, all sorts of sanding machines, because that's really the practical way to shape and finish these timbers. I love hand planes. I've got my hand planes over there, but you'll notice that I don't have a huge collection of them because I simply can't use them that much with Australian timbers. When I do use them, my sharpening regime is probably a little bit different to what most people do. I do have my Waterstones off to the side there. I've got an 8,000 grit Waterstone. Yes, I like to get a bit romantic and sharpen my tools nice and sharp. I tend to do that when I'm using European or American timbers, but when it comes to Australian timbers, due to the higher silica content as well, even though some of the timbers may not be as hard, they'll still have a lot of silica in them, like teak. They do blunt the edges of your tools. So you'll notice over here, I have a grinder. I have a Tormek in the cupboard, in the cabinet over there with the green doors, but I never touch it because it's simply too slow. I found the best way, if you're doing some serious work with some Australian timbers and you're getting chipped edges, is to have a CBN wheel on your grinder. I know people are saying you have to use a slow speed, so a half speed grinder. This is just a standard grinder. I've had no issues with it. The CBN wheel allows me to basically regrind that bevel nice and quickly. And this is where people are going to hate me. I just have a buffing wheel that I put into my drill press. And if I've got to do a lot of work, I'll just go CBN wheel to my buffing wheel to touch it up. That may not get the ultimate sharpness that Waterstones give you, but you see, when you've got a chisel with extreme sharpness on it, as soon as you put it into your red gum or any nice hard timber or timber loaded with silica and you give it a strike, you lose that ultimate sharpness. So you're down to sort of 70% sharpness. So I find that a buffing wheel gets me to that so quickly, like literally just a couple of seconds on the buffing wheel, that's the way to go. So I'll be working away, quick grind on the CBN wheel if I have to, and then straight to that buffing wheel. Or I'll be working, it might just lose its edge. I'll just go straight to the buffing wheel. Yes, that's, like I said, not the romantic way to do it, but that tends to be the practical way to do it. The other way, yeah.
Just on the edge tools there, do you probably be able to talk from your dad's experience as well. Do you find that you end up burning through edge tools a lot quicker because you're constantly sharpening them?
Yes and no. Oh, because we use abrasives as well to do a lot of the stuff. Overall, yes, we might go through our edge tools faster, but not as fast as you think, because we're not using hand tools as much, if that makes sense. Because we will prefer to use abrasives where we can, especially with hand planes, because of the greater internal stresses and our more interlocked grain. They don't tend to plane as well. Yes, you might see videos of people, really touching up their tools, like H&T Gordon in his marketing videos and for his hand planes. He might demonstrate using one of his hand planes on some Gidgee or something like that. In practice, you just don't do that. You do that for the camera. But if you're going to try to hand plane Gidgee, you might get about a dozen swipes with your hand plane before you have to take it back to the Waterstones and sharpen it. So anyone who actually uses Gidgee, any knife maker or anyone who uses it in practice will just sand it, basically. So edge tools, they do wear down faster. A lot of the Europeans who come out here will get new blades for their tools made in modern steels. So let's say Frank, my German mate, he basically would use these European hand planes, Ulmia hand planes and ECE hand planes, but he basically had A2 blades made for them. I think he even had, I think it's D2 or one of the other tool steels. But he was, again, he had an edge sander, and for a lot of the, you can see in that photo of him at the spindle molder, these are legs for a stool, and they have a round profile on them of the spindle molder. We would take these directly from the spindle molder straight to an edge sander and just sand them, because that was the only, you wouldn't stand there with a hand plane doing them and sharpening your hand plane. Now, relating to edges, tungsten is a real necessity. So let's say you're a furniture maker and you've got a bandsaw. A lot of our furniture makers here will strictly stick to using tungsten-tipped bandsaw blades, especially if you want to resaw stuff. That's, again, due to the silica. That's also why you'll find a lot of Australian woodworkers on their jointed planers, so their thicknesses, they won't use strip knives, they will use carbide insert knives. And that's also the same for routers, although pretty much every router bit now is carbide. You won't really have them doing custom profiles. Only big operations will use tool steels, where they'll have lights or a similar cutting edge tool manufacturer, grind them profiles. And it's crazy when you go into a place that does moldings for joinery, the amount of blades that they have or cutters that they have is just immense, because they're backups, basically, because they blunt so quickly. Now, when you go to tungsten, of course, you're not going to end up with these nice big chips. You end up more with the dust. And so working with Australian timbers, dust control really is critical. And also with abrasives, you get that fine dust. So it's bad news if you're asthmatic like myself. I have in my workshop a lot of windows that I can open. You noticed before that I spoke to my wife through the window. So when I'm doing a lot of sanding or even thicknessing or jointing, I will open all my windows, and I've got some double doors there. Remember, my workshop's only 16 square meters. It's only 4 by 4 meters. So it's very small, but I still will open every door that I can. You'll see there's a door there, and there's my double doors. I'll even go inside the house and I'll get a fan in order to try to exhaust all that dust out, because it really is, it's that fine particulate. And that also ties into the next point, which is extractive. So, there's a joke that everything in Australia is trying to kill you. Well, you imagine all of our bugs and things, they're trying to eat the trees. So the trees here, especially the rainforest timbers, have developed a lot of self-defense mechanisms. And so that essentially means extractives, chemicals inside to deter insects. So you've got hewn pine, It smells really nice and sweet, but that's all extractives. Black bean, like I was talking about, carcinogen, like I said. So if you try to sand that, it actually, you can feel it when you breathe it in. So a lot of people who, the old timers, when they would work with it, they would use scrapers, card scrapers on that. So extractives are a big part of it as well. So you need good dust extraction. And the other thing too is that because you get that fine particulate matter, and here in the summertime, it's quite hot, you tend to sweat a lot of that fine particulate will actually stick to your skin, and you actually start absorbing it through your skin. So it's really fascinating that like the laundry is, we've got an outdoor laundry. Before I go into the house, I will actually blow myself off, go take my shirt off, go into the laundry, and I'll just wash my arms, my face, whatever skin I can, and even my legs if I'm wearing shorts, to try to get rid of that dust. It's almost not quite as bad, but it's almost, you have to be conscious of it, like working with asbestos in a way. So yeah, was there any other questions that you guys had about working with these timbers? Because I mean,
there's no other hands up at the moment.
Yeah,
Okay.
I had a follow up. My second question
Please.
I was going to ask you.
For sure.
So I got that piece of purple gidgee.
Yes.
That was a really interesting timber to work with. It felt like coarse. At the same time, I know how oily it is. It was a really odd timber to work with. When I planed it, it came up looking like it was dry, but it's super oily. I've never I've played with quite a few different exotic species, especially some really oily ones, even like lignum, which is quite obviously oily. But this gidgee was just another. It was another beast. I guess it's the high silica content.
Oh yeah. So gidgee is an outback timber. So it's an extremely slow growing. So regular gidgee and purple gidgee are two different acacias. They just share that gidgee name. So you guys may be familiar with ring gidgee. That's basically just curly, regular gidgee. Shrenik's talking about this gidgee that actually have a piece of the same trunk as what Shrenik has. Is that the stuff you got off Bill, Shrenik?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So that's basically the other half of this. Gidgee, how can you say? It's so dense, isn't it, Shrenik? Like it's heavier than water.
It's really heavy.
Like it's like lignum in terms of its weight, like true lignum. I think it's about that 1,100 to 1,200 kilo per cube sort of weight range. You guys are gonna have to convert that to imperial. Sorry, but it's way up there. It's not very commonly used. The only people I know who use purple gidgee are wood turners doing ornamental stuff, really ornamental stuff, and I mean, they're like little special little jewelry boxes or containers and all exotic knobs. And knife handle makers as well. But you're right, it does have some pretty unique characteristics. I can't talk of it as an expert because I haven't used it much. In fact, the only piece of purple gidgee I've ever owned was this log, and I cut it in half, and basically half of it went to the UK, and this is the other half. So I haven't even used it.
Yeah, I ended up resorting to using files.
That's the best way to work with a lot of those timbers. Now, in all seriousness, if any of you get a hold of these outback timbers, these really hard timbers, the best way to work with them, and I actually have a set of files dedicated to that, half rounds and flat files, they're metalworking files, Barco and Nicholson metalworking files. I won't use my Oreo files or my Liogère like rasps. I won't use those on any of these hard timbers because they will destroy those rasps. that steel is just simply too nice. And I mean, hand stitch rasps are basically really just more for the softer timbers. If you use those on Gidgee, you'll destroy them.
The Iwasaki files, though, the wood
Oh, yeah.
files, they perform pretty well on the Gidgee. They actually seem to really like it.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
I'll have to get a couple of those files then, because yeah, like I said, at one stage it was sort of, for me being an Australian, it's sort of, bigger, harder, heavier, and is better kind of a thing, because it's a boasting point. Some people kind of get that misconception that that these timbers are, that we boast about them and say that they're superior because of their qualities, and then you actually work with them and you realize it's just not practical. And that we have other timbers, furniture timbers, that are so much more conducive, and you can produce better work in those timbers using more conventional tools, which
and you
I
can
should
work
get
at a
into.
reasonable pace.
You can work it at reasonable pace, and because you're not forced to abrading them, you don't get exposed to that fine dust, which is the dangerous thing. Really, like as soon as you're working with Gidgee, you're going to breathe in all this really, really, really fine particulate matter, and even a HEPA filter on a shop vac doesn't suck it all up. I've got a Hilti concrete like vac, like what they use for core drilling, because I thought that would be the best vacuum to get, and even that can't pick up all the dust. Yeah. I should show you guys some examples of work done.
Got a question from Richard before you jump over.
Yeah,
Siggy.
yeah. Sorry, Richard.
There we go.
You're
You're muted,
muted.
Richard.
Unmuted. Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Just on the subject of, I made a lever cap screw for someone, and in return he sent me a small block of Gidgee, and it was just big enough to make a
oh, beautiful,
a tool handle.
Oh, you've got a bit of a sapwood in there too. Beautiful. Yes. So even the sapwood on Gidgee is bloody hard.
Really nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was hard, but it turned very nicely just with the tools, and yeah, I was surprised how well it turned. It was no bother at all, really.
Fantastic. That's good to hear.
Yeah. Okay, that was it. Just thought I'd show you that, and
yeah.
Thanks, Richard. Right, Siggy, jump back into your furniture.
Jump back in. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Hang on. Let me just open my folder. And let me just share screen. Perfect. Can you guys see my screen here?
You can see your thumbnails.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay. So I'm going to try to cater towards the audience here. A lot of you are British and American, and you guys love historic things. And so the arts and craft movement is probably a really big thing. I mean, I remember talking to Sarah Carter about Ernest Gimson and how well regarded he is in the UK. So I try to find some examples of makers that produce similar work. So let's start off with Prensel. You saw some of his work, Robert Prensel. Here we go.
Yep,
can you see that? Perfect.
Yep,
so this is, like I said, Blackwood. He would have worked with Tasmanian and Victorian grown Blackwood. He was a wood carver, and he has this sort of, it's a unique take. I don't know what you would call his style. There's Art Nouveau elements, or I guess he's been sort of Germanic. It's what they probably called Jugendstil. Correct me if I'm wrong, Anton. But it's that sort of the same curves as what you would find in Art Nouveau. But there's this sort of honesty in a lot of the joinery and the work like you find in arts and crafts furniture. And he did a lot of playful sort of stuff. So you notice there's a kookaburra here, and here's a cockatoo, another bird, and they're sort of protruding out of his work. So he did a lot of fun sort of furniture. There you go. That's some carvings he did on some door panels. This is a kookaburra sitting on a leaf with gum nuts. So this is a eucalypt of some sort. That's iconically Australian. And that's a bigger picture of that the cabinet. Here's another cabinet, and you can see it's included some local wildlife. This is a possum. Different to what you guys in the US have as an opossum. These are much cuter. They are annoying pests. We can't kill them here in Australia, but in New Zealand, they can kill them. And their fur is woven into a wool, which is actually really quite nice.
You can see those soft curves in the top of that kind of pelmet up there, the kind of Art Nouveau you were talking about, and the ends of it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you guys are getting an idea of this sort of unique style that we sort of had. How do I get to the next picture? There we go. Here's a beautiful bench seat. Again, with gum leaves, so eucalypt of some sort here in that motif. And you can see, again, that curve there at the base, similar like, Art Nouveau sort of style curves. But some of the forms, they're very similar to even like the Gustav Stickley stuff in the US. Again, another beautiful cabinet. Like these things wouldn't be out of place because I've got a liking to the arts and crafts, like the bungalows in Pasadena in California. I'm a big fan of them, and green and green architecture and furniture, and these pieces of furniture would not be out of place in a green and green house. It's just fascinating how the style developed on the other side of the world to, say, the US or the UK, where arts and crafts really came from.
Siggy, what's the time frame for those?
So Robert Prenzel was active probably in the late 1800s, early 1900s.
Okay.
So that's also about the similar kind of a time as Green and Green were active.
Yeah, it's a lot like Austrian Jugendstil, even the elements, but transformed or translated with Australian motifs. It's very similar to Viennese furniture of the time frame.
And you will see these themes. There's a couple of other makers that I will show. One of them I'm a really big fan of. He was based in Melbourne. His name is Schulen Krimper, and he was from the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and he was a Jew who fled. He didn't flee during World War II. He came out before that, around World War I, and he, maybe he was from Budapest. I don't know his exact history, but he was from that region. And some of his motifs are intertwined with Oriental, Malaysian, Indonesian influences, and he's got some very exciting pieces in that mid-century style as well. So, yeah, so this is Robert Prenzel. He made some beautiful chests as well with some low relief, and he did some high relief carving as well. Now, this is all blackwood. So blackwood is, in terms of the workability, it's probably like carving, somewhere between oak and beech in terms of the hardness and workability. It's not like working with linden or basswood. So it is
more
quite
like a walnut.
skillful. Like a walnut, yeah, but blackwood has a interlocked grain and it will chip out a little bit. So for him to get these curves and this sort of, to finish it in such a glossy way is quite skillful. Again, a nice, beautiful desk here. I think this might even be silky oak, which, again, it's not an oak. Silky oak, I believe, is a casuarina. So it's a timber that is native to Australia. A lot of it was grown up north, but they used it all over Australia because Europeans liked it, and they called it silky oak because it has medullary rays that are like on steroids. Like they make the medullary rays in European oak look tame. I'll show you more examples of that later on down the track. So here we go, back to the beginning. So Robert Prenzel was active in Victoria. So again, Victoria, Melbourne. down south here, Melbourne. So we're going to go up to Brisbane now. So that's about 1,100 miles or 1,800 kilometers north. It's about an hour and a bit plane flight away. There was a guy called L.J. Harvey in Brisbane, and he was more of an Anglo influence, and he made some absolutely stunning craftsman style furniture or arts and crafts style furniture. And he was renowned for his carvings. He used a timber he used a lot of what we call red cedar, Tuna australis. It is a timber that grew in that region in New South Wales and Brisbane and Queensland. It's a softwood, and it's the Australian analogue of mahogany in terms of workability. And it was so heavily forested that they called it red gold. And I think there are pieces even in America made from it, because don't forget, we had a gold rush, a literal gold rush. And you had this cross-pollination of people coming from the Californian gold rush to Australia for the gold rush. And naturally, a lot of the furniture made its way over to the US. So if you are in California, apparently in certain government buildings and in some wealthy households, a lot of this red cedar furniture can be found. And it's just beautiful. So L.J. Harvey, there was a whole, they call it the School of Harvey, because there were a lot of other makers and cabinet makers that he collaborated with and influenced to use his sort of style of carving. Again, it's in that sort of, how can you say, playful Australian. So we're kind of known for having a dry sense of humor and joking about everything. And that carries across into the furniture making, because a lot of his carvings have a lot of that sort of fun theme to them as well. This is a beautiful, I don't know what you would call this, a bench seat that would go in a hallway. And again, you can probably see there's a lot of that Anglo influence in terms of that arts and crafts movement. There's probably a lot of similarities to Gimson and Arthur Romney Green and all of those other manufacturers or the
Use them in the
woodworkers.
carvings on that, Siggy?
Yeah, absolutely. You can see there's that red cedar grain. Yeah, absolutely.
That reminds me of Macintosh from Glasgow.
There you go.
Just so I was thinking,
the straight lines in the boxes, and then the carvings are quite Art Nouveau, quite soft and quite like curvy.
So this was a collaboration, I believe, this piece between Harvey and another guy called Merton. Now, I don't know if Merton was Scottish or British. I can find that out for you, but it wouldn't surprise me. But yeah, as you can see, definitely a Scottish influence, as you guys are saying, from Macintosh. Here's that sort of fun way. So pals, that was a panel on a piece of furniture that Harvey carved. This is a collaboration again between, I believe, Merton. Yeah, here it is in the name, and Harvey. I believe Merton did the cabinet work on this, and Harvey did the carvings. This is a mix of black bean and other Queensland natives, because this was, I believe, done for a government institution of some sort where they wanted to showcase various species. And you can see they're just beautiful timbers. The lighter colored stuff down the bottom here would most likely be white beech, which is what I mentioned before. It's one of the popular carving timbers here. And then some of this sort of ornate molding, that would be a harder timber, most likely black bean. The black, it could be, and I could be wrong, it could be Australian ebony. So ebony is the Diosporos family of timbers. We have a Diosporos that is native to Australia. Don't forget, Australia once, at one stage, was part of Gondwana, and we were joined on in a way to Southeast Asia. And so I guess, the Australian ebony is very similar to Makassar ebony, which is in Indonesia. And I wouldn't be surprised if that was Australian ebony. So, of course, the Queensland is a northern state, so it's further up towards Indonesia, and the equator. And so it wouldn't surprise me if that's, yeah, like I said, Australian ebony. Let's go to the next one. Was that the end? That was the end. Oh, I've got some other stuff. This is a panel. So again, another Harvey piece here. The structure is silky oak. You can see that it looks like old oak furniture in the UK. The dark color it fades to, or darkens to, I should say. So the main structure is silky oak, and then the panel here is white beech. And it's that fun sort of kookaburras and dragonflies. The kookaburra eating a witchetty grub, and your eucalyptus sort of flora here. It's beautiful, beautiful stuff. And here is definitely an Art Nouveau style frame, executed in silky oak. Now, hue and pine, you might remember that Tasmanian timber. So Tasmania, there were a lot of, it was a penal colony at one stage, because it was a perfect sort of Alcatraz in that way for that use. So Hobart is the capital city of Tasmania, and it's there are a lot of British and Scottish furniture makers down there. One of them was Hamilton, and this table was from 1850, and this is in hue and pine, and this is what hue and pine patinas to. And it's, now you guys can correct me on this, but it's got that beautiful sort of coloring like what boxwood actually patinas to. And again, this is carved, the details are carved. Hang on, if I can show you how it looks. It's absolutely stunning, the finish that you can obtain on hue and pine. And you can see it's got those bird's eyes on it as well. It's a wonderful timber. So I've looked at some older furniture. Now the mid-century stuff, Krimper, personally, I love his designs. Like I said, he was a Austro-Hungarian Jew who came out to Melbourne, and a lot of his, he was in extremely high demand, and a lot of his designs are very unique. They've got some Oriental influence. Some of the designs I'll show you are not in Australian native timbers. This is actually, I believe, a European oak cabinet, but you can see, I thought it was worthwhile showing you his designs because they're so different to what you'd be used to seeing. I love this stuff. This is a cabinet in European oak. You can see the medullary rays. This would all have been made probably in the 1940s, 1950s. This is a console table in a eucalypt of some sort. It's unknown what it is, but it's probably fumed. That's why it's dark. You can see it's got that quilted or fiddleback figure. This guy also loved his spindle molder, so he's got a lot of these big, bold, broad profiles, which he used very effectively. This is another one of his cabinets. This one's made out of teak. This I realized after I gave it to Scotty to use on the thumbnail for the talk today. I realized it's actually got no Australian timber content in it, but I thought the design was really unique. This is Burmese teak. This is black bean, a chest. A lot of you might perhaps, I think it's very similar to a British maker called Alan Peters, who traveled to Japan and Asia, and he was very heavily influenced himself. And so Schulam Krimper as well, I believe, traveled to Asia, and there's a lot of Alan Peters chests that look very similar to this, both in the taper, in the exposed dovetails, and the curved top on it, that honest construction, and the knobs with those sort of rings turned into the knobs as well. So that's Queensland black bean. Here's a beautiful sideboard that he did in black bean with brass legs. Some, as I said earlier, some of the black bean resembles Brazilian rosewood. And so you can see here how this has a very similar appearance to Danish mid-century Brazilian rosewood veneered sideboards. And the Danes often used brass as well because it contrasts beautifully with these sort of hues in the timber. This drinks cabinet, I believe, is in an Australian timber, probably Queensland maple, but it's unknown. This is a gallery piece. Again, his unique use of raised panels to showcase the grain. This is a lovely black bean chest of drawers on a stand. You can see the way he's sort of got these curves in the feet. It's got an oriental kind of a aesthetic to it. This is another Queensland walnut blanket chest, similar to Alan Peters. And this is a screen. This is probably one of his famous works. I believe this is made from Australian timbers on repeat. He was a very talented designer. Yeah. And this is an exhibition they held for him in the 1970s in the National Gallery of Victoria. I believe just after he passed, where they showcased a lot of his chairs, his screens, benches. And this is one for Garth. This is a console cabinet he made from a New Zealand timber called Kauri. It's hard to show it. Hang on, have I still got the window? No, I haven't. I had a photo of this in color. Let me see. I just think it's a fabulous cabinet. No, I don't. Sorry, folks. We'll move on to the next one. These are some sewing boxes. These almost have like an Ottoman vibe, like a Turkish kind of a vibe, like a fez. I believe these are made in Queensland walnut. Sorry, Queensland maple. Here's another sideboard in black bean. It's a striking timber. It almost looks like European walnut in this case. This is a particularly beautiful sideboard. This is red cedar. So what we were looking at before with LJ Harvey in Brisbane, this is the use of red cedar in mid-century furniture. It's got that beautiful reddish hue. The cabinet on top is black bean, and the white, the blonde sort of highlights a silver ash. I believe it has some myrtle content in it, but I don't see any pinkish colors, so I'm not sure where the myrtle is on it. It could be on the interior of the drawers, but yeah, that's another beautiful piece by Krimper, Shulam Krimper. Here's another Oriental piece in black bean. You can clearly see there's a sort of a Chinese or Southeast Asian influence here. So some very unique designs. And if we go towards contemporary furniture makers, people who are still living today, a lot of you know that I had a very close relationship with a guy called Frank Wiesner, who has since passed, but he strictly used Australian timbers. This is an acacia. This is called Acacia implexa, which is colloquially known as lightwood. And again, you can get it from the agroforestry. Hang on, am I sharing screen? Yes, I am. Sorry, good. It stopped showing that I was sharing. This is, yeah, Acacia implexa. Frank harvested this timber himself in the 1960s, and he built this beautiful desk for a client in about 20 or 30 years ago. The interior here, that's silver ash, another Queensland timber, which you just saw in the Krimper sideboard before. Frank Wiesner, as Daryl knows, was known for his bookbinding equipment, and he employed Australian timbers exclusively in making these plough planes and presses and various other vices as well for specific to bookbinding, and they're highly desirable and sought after. This, I believe, is also a miniature piece. It's a very small piece. Frank was known for his stools, and this one is made from lightwood, and there was a picture before of him standing at the spindle molder, putting a profile on these legs. And one of the last tasks that I did with him when I would go up there and spend weeks at a time working with him was making these stools. These sold like hotcakes overseas and in Australia. We made them all from scratch, including the threads. We turned them on on a special purpose-built lathe that he had. And he made them in all sorts of Australian timbers. This one is in lightwood, so acacia and plexer. This is in spotted gum, a very dense timber that is used in joinery and furniture, but has a beautiful grain, you can see, and it has this ripple, this quilting in it. Now we'll look at some other makers. This is another one of, this is a cabinet that was commissioned in Canberra, which is where, that's the equivalent for Australia as Washington, DC. So it's where all the diplomats are and all the embassies and all of that sort of stuff. I believe he was approached by an American institution or government organization, and they wanted him to make something out of quilted hard maple. And Frank, being Frank, he said, no, we're in Australia. I'm going to make you something out of an Australian timber that you'll treasure. And so he sourced some highly figured silver ash, which again is not true ash. It's not maple, but it has these visual qualities and figuring very similar to highly figured hard maple. And he made this, and they were extremely pleased. And it has a lot of secret compartments. The hinges are actually built into the legs, believe it or not. So they're columns. These legs are columns. And when you open the doors, or I think there might even be doors on the side panels here, they actually these are part of the hinges. It's a very clever design. There you go. You can see it's attached to these columns. And he made all his drawer sliders and hardware out of Australian teak, which is Flendasia australis, or known as crow's ash. It's a very dense timber and oily. And he made these dovetailed telescopic runners out of that stuff. That's one of the reasons I held him in such high regard, because he would make everything from timber where he could. Let's move on to another maker. William Bayliss. Okay, I have to mention Will for a bit of a sad story. He won the Maker of the Year in Australia about 3 years ago. He was an extremely talented young maker. When I say extremely talented, he would have gone on to be a great, and I said would have because he passed away sadly in a car crash. And he would have only been 24 or 25 years old when that happened, when he passed. He made this piece. He was very inspired by Alan Peters. And he made this piece probably when he was only about 21 years old in his spare time at work. He was a cabinet maker for a guy called Evan Dunstan. And it was a real tragedy when he passed because he had so much talent. He had such a unique eye for detail and some very interesting ideas. These are a pair of tables. He also, and don't hold me to it, but he also had a very great interest in Australian reptiles. I believe he had lizards, and his table here is very reminiscent of what we call like a frill neck lizard. So there's a particular species of lizard in Australia that when it gets excited, it has these flaps of skin around its neck, and it puts them up like a peacock with its feathers. And this is very reminiscent of that. Although that's not officially been stated, I wouldn't be surprised if he took inspiration from that. So very talented maker who sadly passed just a year ago. Blackwood. So another use of blackwood in a more modern context, this is Leon Sedubin. He'd be a maker who's probably in his 70s. He was very active in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. He's one of the foundational sort of modern makers in Australia. He traveled to Scandinavia in the 80s to learn about a lot of the Danish designers and, Wegner, Finn Yule, a lot of those sort of guys. Arne Jacobsen, Morgan Borgertson, or however you pronounce the names. He basically went to all these workshops and in Denmark, from Rasmussen to Iverson, and learned about how they make furniture. And he implemented a lot of that in his furniture, but with his own taste. And this is a table he made. He was very well known for these refractory tables. There's a bit of Nakashima and a bit of Danish modern in terms of the aesthetic. This is an example of blackwood. And the variation in the blackwood, you can see that depending where the blackwood has come from, some of it is more of a grey brown and some of it is more of a golden reddish brown. This is another one of his refractory tables. He has these butterflies that he does in a more sort of wispy type design, but yeah, beautiful nonetheless. So that is blackwood, the timber. Radowski, he was another European, probably of Jewish descent. And this is a sideboard made in Queensland walnut, mid-century style, Australian style. But again, very different to the mid-century that a lot of Europeans are used to seeing. What you'll notice with a lot of these Australian mid-century designers is that they used a lot of bold profiles to create relief. I think it's because the grain sometimes in Australian timbers can be plain, so they would try to make use of the coloring, but then trying to play with light and shadow by having these sort of pieces layered on each other for that play of light. So depending on what angle you look at this piece, it would cast a different sort of create a different pattern. Another maker, a very famous maker here, is Tony Kenway. He's highly active. He's very much influenced by the sort of organic shapes. He lives up on the Sunshine Coast hinterland, an area where people enjoy marijuana and surfing. Think of them like Californians. You've got a lot of Hollywood stars who own a lot of mansions in Byron Bay and that area. So you got to think of the people there having that mindset, that sort of hippie, dreamy mindset. And so his furniture is influenced by that. And this is Queensland maple. It's a bed. You might even notice there's some Maloof sort of influences, but with his own unique take. And he's very skilled. He does these three-way miters. So he knows what he's doing. A lot of it is very subtle, so you have to look very closely to pick up on all those little details. This is a dining set he executed in hewn pine. And it hasn't gotten the patina yet because it's probably only about 20 years old. But you might remember me saying earlier that hewn pine bears a striking resemblance, in my opinion, to boxwood. And this, essentially, you could probably fool a lot of people into saying that this is a dining set made in solid boxwood, even though that would be impossible, but it's hewn pine nonetheless. And you probably also notice that a lot of his influence sort of comes, a lot of the ideas are very similar to a British maker called John Makepeace, especially the backs of his chairs and the way they sort of blend into each other organically, the members. Here you go. That's in my opinion very sort of John Makepeace, especially with this frontal piece on the seat here. This is a Tony Kenway rocker made in highly figured blackwood. You can see why it's used as the direct analog of American walnut. I mean, for a Californian, they might get this confused with Claro walnut. It's so easy to, because of that figuring and the beautiful colors.
Siggy, just a short question about this chair. Would this be bent? So is Australian wood bendable? No.
Yeah, so in this case, this particular chair is not bent. It would be very hard to bend these highly figured timbers due to the stresses, the internal stresses contained within the timber. But, sorry, I'm just got a hiccup. Blackwood lends itself very well to steam bending. There is a very famous maker here of Windsor chairs called Glenn Rundle. A lot of Brits know him as the guy who runs the Lost Trades Fair. He basically deals, I wouldn't say exclusively, but the majority of his chairs are from Blackwood trees that he mills up himself. There's another maker called Bern Chandley. The guys at Fine Woodworking magazine in the US love Bern, and his designs are a very modern take on the classic Windsor chair, and he uses Blackwood extensively, even though his clients are asking him to use American timbers because of the influence of American publications. Blackwood itself steam bends very well. But this chair, because of the highly figured nature of it, of the timber, is not steam bent. This is another Blackwood desk in a more tame figuring. But again, you can see a lot of sort of maloof flavor, and especially in the shape of his chairs, and it looks very similar to walnut. Now, we like to use dark timbers and light timbers with dovetails, right, to highlight the beauty of our dovetails. This is a combination of hew and pine, and this is a draw side. So you can see that this, for scale, this is not a large piece of furniture, right? It's got very fine dovetails. This is a South African maker called Neil Erasmus. He lives in Perth on the west coast. So these timbers he would bring over from the southeast coast of Australia. Hew and pine and Blackwood. And you can see how fine the grain is of the hew and pine. You can hardly see the growth rings, because that would be a quarter sawn piece, being a draw side. So you would expect the growth rings to run right or left to right. And you can probably just make out how fine it is. The contrast it creates is beautiful, and I believe his knobs are probably even from what do you call it, from ancient red gum. It wouldn't surprise me. So there you see 3 native Australian timbers used very well to accentuate the beauty of the dovetail. You remember I mentioned William Bayliss, the young cabinet maker who worked for Evan Dunstan. Now this is a Jarrah cabinet from the workshops of Evan Dunstan in Canberra. So this is Jarrah, and this is the typical colouring of old growth Jarrah, that beautiful blood red. The back of the cabinet really shows it. He is meticulous in terms of like his use of timber and his finishing. The back of a Dunstan cabinet looks just as good as the front. And William Bayliss, that fellow, he was the guy who built the cabinets for Evan Dunstan. So Evan Dunstan ran a workshop with, there was William, there was a guy called, or there is a guy called Alex, who I believe does all the chairs, and he's now got a young girl who's doing her apprenticeship there. So his workshop was only 3 or 4 people at any one stage. Alex did the chairs. He's got some very famous rocking chairs and bar stools and things like that. And William, the young 20-something-year-old, did all the cabinets. And so you can see it's finished to a very high degree. You can really see the talent that young guy had. You know, in fact, I should just say this. There's a famous Canadian furniture maker called Michael Fortune. Michael Fortune came out to Australia and met William because he was teaching classes at the Dunstan workshop. And he was so impressed that he would bring William out to New Zealand. There's in Nelson in New Zealand, they have a furniture school there where Michael Fortune would come and teach, as well as schools in America. Like there's one in Maine, a school of fine furniture and craftsmanship or something like that. And Michael Fortune would bring William out to teach with him because he was just that good. Yeah, it's a shame that he passed. Really sad. Here is a piece of furniture made in South Australia, in the tuna capital of Australia, tuna fishing capital, called Port Lincoln, which is a town in the middle of nowhere. It has more millionaires per capita than anywhere else in Australia because they are all millionaires in the tuna fishing industry. And so there is a great thirst for high quality furniture. And there was a company there founded by a South African called Constantia Furniture. And he exclusively used a lot of Australian timbers. You can see the medullary rays in this timber. This is silky oak. And this is why the Europeans called it oak or gave it the nickname of oak, because of that, the medullary rays. It's really quite crazy. And I believe part of the structure is also done in black bean as well.
So that silky oak, Siggy, just remind us, what actually is it?
It's a casuarina, I believe.
Casuarina, okay.
Casuarina. I'll confirm with. Now, hang on. Casuarina is lace she oak. So if you see she oak, which is mainly more so in tool making. So Colin Clinton, give me a second. There's another guy who makes squares and marking gauges. His name is Colin Clinton. And he uses rose she oak, which, let me just stop sharing and I'll quickly show you. Can you see the figuring here?
Wow.
It looks like spaghetti bolognese.
It's almost like fibers of cloth under a microscope, isn't it?
Absolutely. So this is she oak. That's Aloe casuarina. So that's a group of trees that fall under the Aloe casuarina umbrella. But silky oak or forest oak, that is the grevillea. I believe southern silky oak is Grevillea robusta, which is I don't have a picture of it, but it's a very common tree. And so that is what you saw in the Constantia cabinet. Hang on, I'll just share it again. So bear with me, folks. So this is a Grevillea, I believe Grevillea robusta.
Stunning.
So it's hard for me to keep track with all these botanical names because there are so many of them. This one, I actually know the auntie of the guy who made this. This is a 0.4 scale model of some chests of drawers that his parents had. And it's done in hewn pine. So completely from hewn pine, some of it being bird's eye and some of it being plain and straight figured. But this gives you an idea of what hewn pine looks like when it's used. This is that Tasmanian timber, the boat building timber that grows really, really slowly. You know, the one where I said that it can take up to 500 or 800 years plus to get a tree where it's good enough to cut down, or was good enough to cut down for furniture. This is it. Beautiful Tasmanian timber. And like I said, you can get this in veneer form and in lumber form as well. So if anyone gets the chance to work this with hand tools, with chisels or whatever, even to make a small jewelry box, it is an absolute joy to work with. And just like with a humidor, how you don't finish the inside of it, or you might put a coat of shellac, you do the same with your hewn pine. And it was very popular in linen presses because if you store clothes in it, moths won't touch your clothes because of the smell it gives off. So it was very popular in wardrobes, furniture or blanket chests where you stored fabrics, because it repelled little critters that would otherwise eat your treasured items.
Did you say that was a scaled model?
That's a scale model. So this is a 0.4 scale. So essentially a half scale.
Half scale, yeah.
Half scale, yeah.
It's difficult to tell from the photograph how big it actually is.
Yes. Well, I believe that photograph, he put these on top of his dining table when he took these photographs. So I'm guessing they were probably, not that much bigger than maybe a shoebox or a large shoebox or something. But I've never seen them in person, so don't hold me to it, please. So, this isn't contemporary. This is from 1880, but this is another. This was done for the World Trades Fair. I forget if I believe they may have sent this overseas to Europe, to Paris, or to the UK to exhibit. But this was done. I forget where Rock and Co were from. Probably Sydney or Melbourne at that stage. But using veneers and timbers pretty much exclusively Australian, I believe. So there was some nice stuff. Like this wouldn't be out of place in Vienna or somewhere like that. Yeah. So I guess that's some of the photos that I had. I'll just see if I've got anything else. Oh, yeah, some scenery, because it's hard sometimes to imagine where these timbers grow. So, I mean, Australia is not just the outback. We've got this green belt on the east coast. This is what it's like just outside of Melbourne. So like I said, there's the Eucalyptus regnans, the tallest flowering plant of any type in the world. A beautiful joinery timber, because you can see how tall and straight these trees grow, and they don't have branches coming off them. So you get this clean timber all the way up to the very top. The branches and stuff tend to be at the top, and it's extremely strong. These ferns, by the way, are not short. They would probably be in the region of 10 meters tall or so. So they are giant ferns. This is the typical, what we call the Victorian Alps, so the highlands. So this is probably about 800 meters, 1,200 meters above sea level, where you get this dusting of snow. And this is what the forests look like in the winter. You'll notice that the bark is all rough at the bottom, but then as soon as it reaches a certain point, it becomes nice and smooth all the way to the top. Let me see if I've got that picture. I had a picture. Where did I put it? To give you an idea of scale, so this is a typical mountain ash or Eucalyptus regnan, those trees I was just showing, and here's a guy standing in front of it. And the ferns are quite tall. They're not short little ferns. So that gives you an idea of the scale of how big these trees are. They look deceptive in these photos. Yeah, give me a second. Sorry.
So are those ferns a little bit like sort of New Zealand tree ferns, or?
Now I'm not an expert on ferns, so
no. Just
yeah. Hang on, let me just reshare because the toolbar was getting in the way. I'm not an expert on ferns, so don't hold me to that. I can find out for you though.
No. Sorry. Just sort of trying to put it in mind's eye type of thing.
Yep. No, I totally understand what you're getting at there. Now this is West Australia again. So these are the giant karri trees, again, eucalyptus. And going off the mountain ash before, the Eucalyptus regnans, these are similar. So there's a karri tree that when my wife went over with her dad, they went on a camping trip and they came across this karri tree where it actually had rebar or reinforcement bar drilled and pushed into the trunk all the way up like a spiral staircase. And you could go to the top. And I think the tree was about, it had a platform on top and it was about 70 or 80 meters tall. So this gives you a rough idea. These trees are well over 50 or 60 meters tall. This is a karri tree and how they cut them down. Cutting trees when they were logging them is vastly different than cutting trees in Europe or in the US. In the US, they've got those huge redwood trees, and you see those lumberjacks with the huge, in Canada as well, cutting those big spruce trees down with these big chainsaws or these bars on their chainsaws. It's a similar thing in Australia, except you have to imagine the trees are now a lot significantly harder. So a lot of the time, a lot of these loggers are using chainsaw tipped blades, or they've got specially built, they had specially built chainsaws, a lot of McCulloch chainsaws from the US, where, so in the US, you know, they have this, they love their cars and drag racing, and they have these chainsaw sports, you know, where they would hot rod their chainsaws. And it was a similar thing. They had these chainsaws here that they would essentially hot rod to squeeze as much power out of them in order to cut these trees down. It's insane how when you actually see a eucalyptus of some sort or a eucalypt being cut down, how slow it is. And it's not uncommon that they had those those double-ended chainsaws where they had a bloke on one end of the bar and one guy on the other, because cutting these trees down is like cutting into concrete. So this is West Australia. So Tasmania, the Western Arthurs. This is another photo of a typical forest in Tasmania. I don't know specifically what tree this is, but you can tell with all the moss and the ferns that it's a very wet place. This was taken by a very famous Lithuanian-Australian photographer called Peter Dombrovskis in the 1960s and 70s. It was very famous. Another photo taken by him in Tasmania. So this is very typical of what the rivers look like in Tasmania, very remote. The Huon pine trees were harvested by what they called the piners. That was the nickname they gave these guys. And they would go on boats, little rowboats, up these waterways with all their camping gear, with their swags and tents and things. And they would spend weeks in the forest, cutting down the Huon pines, dragging them into the river, and then floating them downstream to the towns where the timber would be cut up. So they went to a great deal of effort, even back then, 100 years ago or so, or even before that. Again, this is Victoria, typical what you would see in the mountain ash forests, so the Eucalyptus regnans. So you can see the ferns are very tall. And this is what Queensland looks like, the Daintree forest. So this is why a lot of the trees get extractives in them, because you've got these waterways, you've got a lot of bugs, snakes, critters, crocodiles, all sorts of stuff. And of course, the extractives, the chemicals within the timbers, are one of their main forms of self-defense. Now here you can see an arborist. There's some really cool videos on YouTube. I've got a lot of mates in the US who work in the logging industry, and they are just blown away by the way that the arborists or the tree surgeons work here in Australia, given that the trees, some of these really tall trees, these giant trees, grow in densely populated areas, and that the trees are much narrower, their trunks, but taller. They're like the mast on a ship, and the timbers are so hard to deal with. There are some certain challenges that these tree surgeons face that their American counterparts don't have to, and blows them away in how they work. So there's some really cool videos that you can see on YouTube about how these guys are cutting down trees in the Dandenong Ranges, just outside of Melbourne, and doing it with like surgical precision. It's phenomenal. And that's a typical view if you're hiking around in one of these mountain ash forests and you look up. You've got all these columns. It's quite a thing to behold. And that's back up in Queensland. So yeah, I guess I've yapped on for a while. Did you guys have any questions? I'll stop sharing screen so that
just want to say, Siggy,
yeah.
All the timber part was amazing, and the lumber part, but it was really great to see a little bit of an insight into Australian furniture making, because we just don't see it.
Yes.
Because there are lots of similarities, but it's cool to say they all have their own twist, or what do you call it? Australianism, Australity.
It's like a flavor.
Yeah. It was brilliant to see this.
I think that's why I really wanted to show that second half, and that's just a taste of what there is out there. Because Australia, I mean, you have to realize that Captain Cook, all that, like they only arrived in Sydney, which is like, given the vastness of Australia, it's so massive. They only arrived in like the 1770s, right? And by the time they went down to Melbourne, or discovered and established Melbourne, it was already the 1800s. And I mean, the Dutch arrived on the west coast in Perth, I mean, at least 100 years before the British went to Sydney, but because there was nothing there and it was just desert, they just turned around and said, this is pointless, let's go elsewhere. But most of the discovery of the land occurred by Europeans in the 1800s. And then you had this big influx, because originally it was a penal colony, right? Like they sent a lot of convicts out to Australia. It was in the first fleet. All that labor was all just convict labor.
Yeah, I was flabbergasted that this prisoner colony had another prisoner colony down in Tasmania.
In Tasmania, yeah. And there's a fantastic movie they made about a prison break that occurred in Tasmania, where they escaped and they ended up resorting to eating each other because it became a fight for survival to get out, because Tasmania, there are still regions of it where it is so remote, and the bush, the scrub is so thick that it's not only just hard to penetrate physically to go through, but it's so disorientating. I mean, my dad worked down there on the hydroelectric scheme because in the 1970s, they were looking for Europeans to go down there, and they paid them very well as joiners to establish these dams they built to generate electricity. And so he remembers going on hikes, and I remember he said he wandered out of the construction camp just 20 minutes and he got lost, and it was like the entire day he was just lost, walking around in circles because of that. So disorientating. So it's the perfect prisoner colony within a prisoner colony. But yeah, they in the 1800s, especially when they discovered gold in Melbourne, it was just like, the Californian gold rush, or like the discovery of oil. You had all these people. We had this huge Chinese immigration occurring, where they were coming after the gold. And there is Chinese like craftsmen. I was going to say Chinese made, but Australian made by Chinese craftsmen in the 1800s, and they had their own unique flavor as well. So yeah, it's really, really, really interesting to see that, and how a lot of those guys. There was a Danish guy who came out to Brisbane. There are actually a few Danish folks that came out in the 1800s, a few Scandinavians, and they developed their own style. And there was one that I don't actually even know the name of, but I believe he got involved with like missionary work and stuff. And he found himself like, 1,000 kilometers out in the middle of nowhere. like up in far north Queensland before that was even settled, working with natives and things like that, as in the indigenous people. And there's some work he did. He was a master cabinet maker from Denmark, and he trained a few people. He had a few apprentices, and he had sawn his own veneer from rainforest timbers that he didn't even name or didn't even know the name of. They weren't even discovered. And one of them I remember was this. It was like a replica, life-size replica of maybe a Bible or something, of like a leather-bound book. And all of the ornamentation that would have otherwise been, a fancy leather-bound book, he did in veneers that he had cut and done himself. And it was just, and he where the lettering is normally embossed in the leather, he had carved out his own lettering. It was fantastic. Really fantastic. So you have all these really, now not so much. The issue is, since the dawn of the internet, the young modern makers here are really copying designs shown in the US and in the UK. And because there's no formal training system for cabinet makers, in fact, Evan Dunstan, the one who had that apprentice who unfortunately passed, Evan Dunstan got this fellowship from this Jewish association. They promote education in the arts. And he traveled in about 3 or 4 years ago to Scandinavia to see their teaching methods. And he was inspired because a Scandinavian journeyman cabinet maker came, a Swede, who was in his early 20s, and knocked on his door and said, hey, I'm on my journey on my waltz, like traveling, and can I spend some months working with you? And he said, yes. And he said, I've heard you're one of the renowned cabinet makers in Australia. He said, sure. And Evan, who is not a proud guy, he's a very honest guy, bluntly honest guy. He said, this Swedish guy who was in his early 20s basically demonstrated more knowledge than him or any of his craftsmen. And it changed his thinking. He said, hang on, what's going on in Europe and in Sweden? How are they doing things? And so when that guy returned to Sweden, he said, one day I'm going to come to Sweden and you're going to have to show me around and explain how you guys are so well trained. And so he did. He got this fellowship and he went over, and he wrote a whole paper. It's available for free on the internet. I can put a link to that. And basically, Evan came back and said, Australia has no structured system. It's just like the Wild West. And so because of that, people educate themselves using publications. It's the only way they can. And because, of course, in Australia, the clientele who have money, especially the younger crowd, are all tech millionaires and things like that. They often travel a lot to the US and to Europe. So they just want copies of stuff they see in mansions in Silicon Valley or in New York or something like that, that some red hot interior decorator is showcasing. And so that's why it's sad, because there are so many good makers. There's a really good maker called Simeon Dux or Jerks or something like that. We call him Simeon Dux. And he, very talented, but he exclusively, and there's another one on YouTube called Nick Padula that a lot of people are famous know of for his channel on YouTube. He pretty much was only ever paid to use walnut and maple and ash, because people started seeing these. There's an Irish maker. He does these. He's a furniture designer, and he does a lot of steam bent, dreamy curves in a very contemporary way. And people see that and they go, Nick Padula, make this for me. And so there's been a stagnation in terms of the development of an Australian flavor, which I think is a shame, because like you saw, Robert Prenzel, even though he was German, he was Bavarian, and LJ Harvey was Australian, but I mean, these people, they really showcase the Australian spirit, that sort of jovialness, like don't take yourself too seriously. And that really comes from, like, the convict life, like when the early settlers came here and there was just this barren land with this extreme distances between settlements. and it bred a certain kind of person. It bred this toughness into people that you didn't really get anywhere else in the world, and this camaraderie. So in Australia, we have this cultural thing. Yeah, we're known for tall poppy syndrome. That's one of the negatives. We're known also for thinking that we have a lot of culture here, but we don't. Like compared to Europe or the Middle East, our culture is so immature, in all honesty. But we have this camaraderie that came from those convict days. When we have bushfires, terrible bushfires where millions of acres are burned. We have everyone bands together. We have the world's largest volunteer firefighting force. 70,000 people, I think, is in the New South Wales Rural Firefighting Service. And they're all, even, you can even see on YouTube that our Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, some people like him, some people don't. He was our Prime Minister 10 years ago. He is a volunteer firefighter. And there's footage of him like in firefighting gear in the bush, like going into people's houses with oxygen masks, like checking that people are okay. And he doesn't want any publicity. They don't publicize it because it would be taboo. It's just the thing that they do. And I mean, there's a classic photo. I'll quickly share my screen of, let me just get out of that. Because, yeah, it sort of helps you understand the sort of mentality of people. So the bushfires and how they affect us. So these are some photos taken by the newspapers, but we have these wildfires, just like they have in California. But you have to understand that the trees we have a much higher flammability, like the volatility is far greater because of the eucalyptus oils and things. And there's, because of our sparse population, we just don't have the personnel like to respond quickly to these fires. So they get out of hand a lot quicker. These are just how wild the fires get. And the scenes that it leaves behind. But from these fires, like people nurse the animals. So you get this, I don't know, I hope this kind of illustrates the mentality it breeds within, when like that unique sort of personality that Australians have. And then this sort of idea of regrowth that comes through it, and helping each other get through the tough times. And so that's why you see in that furniture from LJ Harvey and Prenzel, that sort of jovialness to it. Yeah, like no matter how crap things are going, like we can get through this together, kind of a thing. And it's showed in that furniture.
Is there any way? Is there any sort of lines through the furniture which reflect the indigenous population?
Oh, so the topic of indigenous and how,
yeah, I know it's
you know what I mean? It's a highly contentious topic, like next level kind of contentious. I mean, for example,
it's a lot more woven in New Zealand than it is in Australia.
100%. And I don't know. I'm not an expert in that field. I'm also not an expert to comment in how it is in New Zealand, nor in any other country. I'm just an engineer. But there's a lot of, how can you say, there is a lot of work that still has to be done to rebuild relationships there. And so there's not a lot of influences, or there wasn't a lot, because Indigenous were used in some ways as slave labor, if that makes sense. So they never were held, they were never nurtured in the way to build furniture and use their Aboriginal art
would have been reflected within their own.
Yeah, and there are certain rules.
There are certain that, rather than woven into the sort of growing fabric of the country.
Well, so when Australia was settled, or when the Europeans came out here, and I don't want to sound like I'm putting the Indigenous down, but you have to understand that the point at which they were in terms of the cultural sort of timeline is that they were very much like the pygmy Bushmen. They hadn't yet, they didn't have a Bronze Age. They hadn't yet, discovered textiles and things like that. It was literally bark huts. They were still carrying food around in bark vessels. They were weaving certain containers and bags and things roughly from grass and things like that, but they didn't have a silk industry like in China, or they didn't, to create fire was still rubbing two sticks together. And I'm not saying that to put them down. I'm just saying that you've got this highly advanced culture that comes in then, and they then come like meet the polar opposite. And so certain states too weren't really developed until the 1800s, which isn't that long ago when you think about it. Like when you had people were in Austria were like, listening to the premiere of Chopin or something in a concert hall, or in Paris, they were the Impressionists. At the same time here, you still had people living in bark huts. So I don't think there has been enough time yet for the Aboriginal influence to infiltrate furniture. And I don't think it's because of a lack of skill now, because of course now we've got modern technology, and of course there are incentives now to get not all Indigenous people live in bark huts. Like there are plenty of people who like university educated and everything now, right? But I don't think there is enough of an incentive for them to bring their flavors into the furniture, because everyone who can afford that stuff wants American shaped furniture,
Right.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Aboriginal,
that's what I was half expecting was there maybe some elements of carving.
This is an area that I think has a lot of potential, and I had some ideas of my own, because a lot of Aboriginal indigenous, I should say, motifs are chip carve. Like you could chip carve basically, because a lot of it is dot paintings where they literally they didn't have paintbrushes, so they would blend their pigments, and they would literally use a twig, and they would just flatten the end of a twig against a stone and dip that in and dab dots essentially. And so there are a lot of elements like that which could be translated into chip carving. And there's an American lady who went to Fiji, and she learned how to do this Fijian motifs, and that can also, I think, has like great potential to be translated. I had ideas for furniture that I hadn't told anyone because I wanted to maybe make an exhibition piece, but I had an idea of potentially using native timber, doing that chip carving, and where the chip carving areas are, to gild those areas, because my dad's a gilder, and that way you had that contrast. Yes, I do know there are some initiatives to up in the far north in Darwin. There are some government initiatives to train Indigenous cabinet makers, but a lot of the furniture that they are outputting are in that minimalist mid-century modern form, if that makes sense.
I could picture that. Yeah.
It's what sells. Yeah.
In a way, I think they just don't have a furniture making tradition because they just didn't need it. It's just like my sister did her degree in indigenous art in Canada.
Yes.
And if you don't have wood and you don't need wood, why would you make furniture? It's like a little bit like some Northern African cultures. If wood as furniture is just not in your tradition, it's just not ingrained. They put their art or their expression in some other places. So why would you make them furniture makers? But you sure can see indigenous, Aboriginal, Australian influence in a lot of arts often translated into textiles or just structure, earthy stuff like this. There's a great tradition of great history of art and even craft, but it's just in another field than we use.
Yeah, I would add to that, Anton, that sometimes perception of furniture, in fact, it has some similarities to what might be referred to as a Japanese headrest. That's not uncommon in certain parts of Africa.
Yeah.
So it is a piece of furniture, but it's a small piece of furniture which could be carried.
Yeah, nomadic.
So it's obviously a European idea. We're thinking of certain things that we classify as furniture.
Yeah.
In a room.
Yeah. Yes. Fixed, and probably only gets moved maybe twice in its life.
Yeah.
So sometimes you've got to sort of kind of open your mind a little bit into what somebody else actually identifies as furniture.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And don't get me wrong, while there may not be cabinets and sideboards that the indigenous made, well, their whole philosophy was different. Like from what I know, and again, I'm not an expert on it, nor have I spent time living up in the north. My wife can actually tell you much more than me because she spent 2 years living in the middle of nowhere in an area called Arnhem Land, which is like a protected. It'd be like a Native American reserve kind of a thing, but huge in the far north of Australia. And there are certain areas in there where it's like if you're Caucasian, if you are not Indigenous, you're not allowed to be there. And my wife lived up there for 2 years. This is 18 years ago, because she worked for an aged care provider, and she was sent up there with her cousin to basically provide care for the elderly. And so she would take them fishing, help them go fishing, and they're just a bit like the Inuits. Like they're nomads. Their mentality is like nomads. They have this connection with nature that is unbelievable. They live in the most barren land that you can imagine, where literally there are crocodiles, snakes, everything's trying to kill you, and they just walk around barefoot and with such confidence. They're just so in tune with the environment. And my wife can better explain it because she actually lived with them for a decent amount of time, and she can explain how they think, which really is the only way to understand how their culture works. But they were very much a people who believe in only taking what you need from nature to live in harmony with it. So they're not the kind of culture that tries to hoard or accumulate goods or jewelry or whatever. And there is a lot of art up there, Aboriginal like rock art, that is amongst some of the oldest in the world. I think they've dated some of it to be 40,000 years old or so. They used to also, so earlier I said they made these vessels for carrying food or nuts or whatever they were eating around in. They call them coolamons. And they used to make them a lot out of bark that, just like in Sweden, with Sloyd movement and everything, they cut some birch bark off a tree and they make vessels from it. So too the Aborigines or the Indigenous did with our bark, and they would often carve it, or they made shields from the bark. And that was their way of expressing their art form as well. But they were very much it's interesting, a little while ago, I realized I wanted to improve my memory to help me at work and learn like memory exercises. And I read a couple of books about memory, and they used the Australian Aborigines as exemplars with memory, because their culture back then was not, they recorded stuff not in physical things, books or paintings or with artifacts. They recorded everything in their memory. They wanted to be, they were minimalists in a way with accumulating physical goods. And whether that was navigating, so they could navigate hundreds of kilometers just by using waypoints and leaving little bits of rock art here or there, and using the stars, because they were very. If you a fascinating topic is just Googling the Aboriginal Dreamtime stories. That's what they called them, where they used they were so good at memorizing all the constellations and everything through stories. That's probably one of the reasons why they didn't really have a furniture culture, because they were always nomadic, just moving from area to area, and they didn't build permanent structures. Like even in, and again, Garth is better than me at this. In a better position to comment on, the structures that the Maori built, but they at least built forts and huts and things that were a little bit more permanent. The Aborigines, the Australian Aborigines, really just like lent a couple of pieces of bark against a tree and just slept under it and then moved on. They were really like a pygmy bushman. So that's
but that's not so far away. The foundation of European Occidental culture is the Greek culture, and if you look at Homer's what is it called in English, the Odyssey. This was the same thing. This was only told by stories and written down 2,000 years later. And at the time they wrote it, there was no Athens, there was no Thebes, there was no Sparta. There were a bunch of sheep herders in some really barren hills on the Peloponnese. So
yes.
It's not so far away.
I'm going to have to interrupt, and
Sorry.
I'm just going to do it. I'm going to do it like that. I think we've got way off topic, and we're now talking about cultures and stuff like that, and we were talking about Australian woods. And I hate to interrupt, Siggy, because it's lovely. It's lovely hearing from you. Does anyone have any timbers? Jesus, I've got timbers in the brain. Does anyone have any questions about Siggy and his talk tonight so far? What I really want to do is I want to kind of finalise it up. If anyone's got any final questions, and end the call, and then you can chat for as long as you want to. You understand that, I hope. Anybody get any other questions for Siggy? Thank you, Siggy. That was amazing. Your knowledge of furniture and historically and the timbers was really, really good. I really enjoyed that. I'm going to have a toast to the bench. I'm going to say thank you from everybody for doing that talk. Really amazing. So, to the bench and absent friends.
The bench and absent friends.
To the bench and absent friends.